Hello and welcome to the MJ Cast Exposed. This is the second in my series highlighting influential and controversial members of the MJ fan community. I seem to be losing my voice, so I hope that this holds out for this video. In this episode, we'll be taking a look at how two Australian lads transformed the MJ fandom, giving us all exclusive access into the world of Michael Jackson. We're also going to take a dive into the controversies surrounding the MJ cast and look at some of the allegations made against them. And lastly, we'll take a look at the secret organisation that threatens the very future of the world's premier Michael Jackson podcast. And I'll also be speaking to one of the members of this so-called organisation. Now, my original plan for this episode was to include a video interview with the MJ cast, but we're all on different parts of the globe and couldn't quite nail down a convenient date and time. Jamon, Elise, Q and Charlie kindly gave their time to contribute and respond to some questions I had, and we're working together on getting together again for part 2 of this video soon. Jamon and Elise also provided many of the photos that accompany this episode. So from our interaction for this video, it's very clear what a tight team the MJ cast are. They have so much love, obviously, for Michael, but also for each other. And I think this sets such a good example. Unfortunately, there are some problematic people in the fan community who really should take note of the MJ cast, but we're going to get to them a little bit later. So, episode 1 of the MJ cast was released on 22nd of February 2015, following a mini test episode the week before, and it's really interesting hearing these early episodes and listening to them again. It reminded me that even from the start, it showed evidence of their dedication. It was quite apparent because Jamon was recording from a cupboard so he could improve the sound quality. Jamon and Q, they sound so enthusiastic, and 6 years later you get a real sense of how the team over the years have consistently improved, from the sound quality to the presenting, from the interviews. The MJ cast have definitely upped their game, and it's no surprise that through their hard work and dedication they've grown into something that even they couldn't foresee back in 2015. But did you know that 5 years before its debut, there was another podcast called MJ Cast? This podcast was also devoted to everything Michael Jackson, and it was also hosted by two young men, one from the UK, the other in New Zealand. And I found that quite a coincidence, and I wondered if perhaps this inspired Jamon and Q to put together their own MJ podcast. Now, Jamon says the name MJ Cast isn't just because it's a Michael Jackson podcast. It's because they're a cast of personalities. They're the MJ Cast family. And so it wouldn't feel right for us not to acknowledge the other members who have contributed so much over the years. So let's raise a glass of whatever you have to Damien Shields, Charles Thompson, Steve Hodges and the many other members of the family who have been instrumental in the success of the MJ cast over the years. And of course, we have to pay a very special dedication to the much missed TJ. Jamon said that he started the MJ cast because their group of friends had great discussions about Michael, and being an avid podcast listener himself, he realised how important these conversations could be for other fans. Jamon also says he was quite hesitant about starting the podcast. He thought perhaps it wouldn't be good enough, that people wouldn't care, but he was really inspired and pushed forward by his friend TJ. Initially, they hoped to just share information and entertainment among the fans, but both Jamon and Q quickly learnt that the podcast meant a great deal to many people. As well as providing comfort and hope to fans, they also realised they were actually building an archive of valuable material that people were able to access for years to come. And this archive demystifies Michael Jackson as the man. Elise herself says that she joined the MJ cast after feeling they were like a remote family, something a lot of us feel. She started working behind the scenes and then clicked with Jamon and Q, and Elise says after working with the team for the last 3+ years, she deeply values their relationship and respects the goals and values of the MJ cast and truly stands by what they do. So a week ago, I asked you lovely lot on Twitter to share your opinions about the MJ cast, and overwhelmingly the response was positive, and your messages and tweets were full of high praise. So before we look into some of the negative claims some of you also sent, let's take a moment to see why you hold the MJ cast in such affectionate high esteem. And we're going to start with my own personal view. So I started listening to the MJ cast back in around 2017, and that's because I wanted to hear conversations about Michael Jackson. Years ago, before the internet, I belonged to a Michael Jackson pen pal group, which was an excellent way of uniting with fans around the world, and I can't stress enough that this pen pal group literally changed my life. Not only did it connect me with other Michael Jackson fans, but I met some amazing people who made lasting positive changes to my life, and it was through this pen pal group that I actually ended up having children and a grandchild. So obviously the MJ fan community is a very special thing to me. I hold it very dear. But as we got older, naturally, we all got busy with life, and I found myself without having friends around me who would want to have intelligent conversations about Michael Jackson. So I got involved with forums, with websites, and of course I started devouring every single episode of the MJ cast. Jamon and Q became a source of real comfort, and through their interviews with people who worked and knew Michael Jackson, this strengthened my own personal relationship with the man. Now, one thing I didn't anticipate was that I felt a closeness with the MJ cast team. I welcomed them into my life with every episode. They were in my home. They were a staple of my life through many good and low points. So I naturally developed an emotional attachment to the podcast. And I know I speak for many of you who have developed similar relationships with them. So let's take a look at some of your opinions. So I put out a tweet asking for your opinions about the MJ cast for this video. The Pale Prince of Peculiarity says, with all the special guest interviews, the MJ cast is probably one of the best valuable archives when it comes to MJ. Sandra says, the thing I'm looking forward to, great content, good people. Tatiana says, the MJ cast is a great resource on Michael Jackson's legacy, available for everyone, and it's cemented for years to come. Through their episodes, they provide a vast information on anything related to MJ, hands down the best to ever exist. Much love and appreciation. Dorsa says they are amazing and professional. They ask great questions as well as follow-up questions from their guests. Maria says their work is outstanding and single-handedly reignited my love for MJ when there was little to be excited about. Not to mention the hosts are wonderful people. Ashley says they're amazing. Jason David says absolute legends. Paul Dwyer says the MJ cast are one of the most important and reputable aspects of keeping Michael Jackson's true legacy alive today. They're so well resourced and factual. My absolute favourite podcast. Amazing work from an amazing group of people. And on it goes. Ben says the MJ cast provides an invaluable archive of interviews, discussions and news, having the memories and stories from MJ's collaborators, employees and friends down on record is great and provides an amazing resource for learning more about Michael's art, his creative processes and personality. Discussions and round table style episodes are great for those of us with very few or no fan friends in real life. Jamon, Elise and the team clearly put a lot of work into creating the podcast, and it really shows. It's great to have such a professional resource in the community. MSK says excellent content. Konstantinos says thank God that we have the MJ cast to learn more about the artists that we all love. The hosts are doing a tremendous job interviewing their special guests. Thank you Jamon, Elise and the additional hosts Q, Charlie and Damien. Ryan Michaels says the MJ cast is the only entity on the planet that is bearing and carrying the legacy of Michael Jackson's life and art into the future. That's a hell of a burden. The estate sure as hell isn't. I wouldn't want to carry that burden, and low life's dogging on them wouldn't know how to. Dizzy says they've always had my support. And Dullboy says doing really important work with zero support from the estate, hugely commendable, and appreciate the artistry of MJ rather than the BS that some fans prefer. And lastly, Stephen says I enjoy and look forward to every single episode. I feel sometimes the boys dig a bit too hard for anti-estate stuff, and Charles can be too blasé about Michael, but other than that I'm their biggest fan. And actually when Stephen learned that I was doing this episode on the MJ cast, he kind of forewarned me to be nice to the team. So one common thread is the fact that the MJ cast are doing what the estate can't or won't, and it has been left to fans to right those wrongs. Now you guys are also loving the fact that the MJ cast is like a living document. It's an archive of Michael's life, and I think the team have certainly done more to show who Michael Jackson really was through their interviews with his collaborators. So now we're going to take a look at some of the negativity. Now, obviously, being on a public platform for so long, the MJ cast were bound to take a few hits. but through researching and reaching out to various people for this video, I was not prepared for the amount of absolute bollocks the MJ cast have been subjected to. Now, I know some of you don't like me swearing, so this is a warning that there may be some fruity language flying about in this next segment. When I get riled up, I find cursing is an adequate way of conveying my emotions. But first, here's my criticism of the MJ cast. So, after a few years of enjoying the podcast, I sent the team an email and they didn't reply. And that really pissed me off. Now, since then, I've developed as a person and I realised that actually the whole world does not revolve around me. But at the time, not receiving a reply was hurtful. Obviously, the team receive a lot of messages from their audience, but because the MJ cast is very special to me, I thought I was special to them too. And I guess that's why it hurt that they didn't reply. It sounds like I'm still bitter about it, but honestly, I'm really not. I guess that's because I'd struck up this personal relationship with the podcast. I'd allowed the MJ cast into my home and into my life, and the relationship I have with the MJ cast is unlike any other I have with any other podcast. I know a lot of you feel the same way. We're part of this amazing MJ cast global family, and so sometimes when Jamon tweets something that we don't agree with, it kind of bites into this relationship. We kind of forget that the team can have their own opinions about things that differ from our own. And that seems to be a common thread with the messages I've received from people complaining about Jamon, Q and Charlie's opinions. Elise seems to be more of a peacekeeper. I definitely see her defending Jamon, and I consider her responses to always be balanced and fair. There's also allegations that the MJ cast, and Jamon in particular, are gatekeepers of the fan community, that they're a closed-off exclusive group, and if you're not part of the MJ cast, then in their eyes you're not important, that your views and opinions don't count. Now, I don't quite understand this. Yes, the MJ cast, they've found their niche in our community, they've built up a reputation for exclusives and, in my opinion, adult and responsible conversations, but just because they don't agree with, for example, some of the things the MJ estate get up to, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're anti-estate or pushing an anti-estate agenda. I think the estate should be held accountable by us, the fans. But there definitely seems to be this correlation between the MJ cast and the estate. For example, with my videos, if I talk positively about the MJ cast and negatively about the estate, my dislike ratio is higher than on other videos. On a recent MJ cast, they briefly spoke about COVID-19 and their views didn't exactly match up with my views, but I respect that. And I'm certainly not going on Twitter to call them out for having a different opinion than me. But for some fans, Michael Jackson is obviously an emotive subject. So I think when Jamon, Damien or Charlie tweet something that fans don't agree with, their emotions are triggered. But it is worth remembering that everyone involved with the MJ cast are, yes, they're Michael Jackson fans, but they're also fellow human beings first. Just because they're united in their love for Michael, that doesn't mean that they share the same opinions or views of the world as you or I. And just going back to those gatekeeping comments, like I said, I didn't agree with this, but when I contacted Jamon for this episode, I felt initially that he was taking over and directing how he wanted this episode to go. So was this evidence that he was gatekeeping this episode? Well, I took a step back and realised actually he was just being really helpful and was instrumental in putting me in contact with everyone else. So perhaps this idea of gatekeeping is actually just a matter of perspective. One of the comments on my MJ fam drama video recently was from Mira Kay, and she says there are many different groups and cliques in the Michael Jackson fandom, and they will clash occasionally because they can't just ignore or accept the other whom they disagree with on any topic really. She says, sadly, this is a pattern and wish that there was some more self-awareness in the fan community to break that cycle of toxicity, especially from fans with large platforms. And I think that's a really good point. And we all have a responsibility to reach out to members we might not agree with, to find some common ground and have positive exchanges. All this infighting does absolutely nothing to serve Michael Jackson. All it serves is ego. Some of you pointed out problematic tweets from Jamon and Damien, especially regarding the Regina and Roger accounts on Twitter. I think this is from about a year ago, and I believe the account is now closed. One of you said that Jamon and Damien bullied this individual who received no public apology. Well, I've seen limited screenshots of this conversation, so without context, it wouldn't be fair to give my opinion about that. But all I will say is that I would find it very surprising to see Jamon or Damien bullying anyone. just knowing what they've gone through being bullied themselves. For example, the Loving Neverland tweets were considered bullying, but in all reality, Jamon was highlighting an issue that very few people were talking about. Okay, his delivery could have been better, but his tweet about the original voiceover led to the creators improving their documentary. And this highlights this idea that as Michael Jackson fans, we can't critique any pro-Michael Jackson content. I've mentioned this before, but constructive criticism is just that. If fans take constructive criticisms as a personal attack, then that is their issue. So a lot of the negative back and forth from fans and the team seems to centre around a difference of opinions, and that's fine as long as it doesn't evolve into bullying, but unfortunately very often it does, and it's bad enough to bully someone for their views, but it's an entirely different matter when there's a behind the scenes organised attack on individuals, and unfortunately that's what's been happening. So it was referenced in a YouTube comment that there's a secret organisation out to take down prominent members of the fan community. I was a bit surprised when I first saw this, but it kind of made sense. Some of the attacks on the MJ cast and others did seem to be organised and quite well thought out. So of course I dove a little deeper and uncovered quite a lot, which I'm hoping to include in a feature video, because there's a lot to expose with this so-called organisation. And listen up, ladies, and I use the word ladies loosely. If you're listening, if you're thinking about tightening up your security, it's too late. The horse has bolted. You've already been infiltrated, my loves. Your actions, your concentrated attacks against members of the fan community are absolutely fucking disgusting, and they will stop. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, I had a conversation with a supposed member of this organisation. I'm not revealing their name, but they have been accused of being part of orchestrating attacks on the MJ cast and others. They're a prominent member of the community, an advocate and massive Michael Jackson fan, and they were surprised to learn that apparently they're part of this organisation. This insinuation has unfortunately had consequences for them. It's affected their credibility and their emotional health, and also their ability to advocate for Michael Jackson. This is just not needed in the Michael Jackson fan community. And for those of you who say that Jamon and the MJ cast are gatekeepers of the community, look elsewhere for evidence of gatekeeping. Now, I know of a couple of members of this organisation who have left and want nothing whatsoever to do with the others, and have actually reached out privately to members of the MJ cast and others to apologise. I've also spoken to two other people who were recently publicly bullied by the leader and her gaggle of cohorts, so this is obviously still going on. But if you're a member of this pathetic group, what on earth are you doing? How does serving your ego help further Michael Jackson's legacy? You are the Karens of the MJ fandom, and your toxicity tells us more about you than the people you target. Now, before I get accused of deflecting away from the MJ cast, let's take a look at other allegations and so-called crimes that they've been accused of committing. Of course, there was the whole lip-sync drama where I think it was Charlie called out Michael's lip-syncing during the history tour. Charlie and Damien said they preferred Michael's live vocals in concert over the lip-syncing, and this led to them to being accused of being child abusers and women beaters. I mean, what is going on? And even if Charlie and Damien's tweets were inflammatory, is that kind of disgusting response proportionate to their tweets? Of course it isn't. And also bear in mind that if you find yourself being swept up in a drama about a prominent member of the community, you're more than likely being manipulated by people who have no right to call themselves Michael Jackson fans. Jamon and Q have been bullied relentlessly over the years, and that takes a toll, and it's to their credit that they're still able to deal with all of that. Of course it affects them, but they still continue to produce informative and entertaining content for us. Jamon's family's safety has also been threatened, and this is coming from supposed Michael Jackson fans. Now, I hope that you feel just as ashamed as I do listening to that. Another crime is apparently Jamon thinks he's the God's gift of the fan community. I mean, he's cute, but God's gift? I mean, why? Is it because, again, he's given his opinions, and like I said earlier, because perhaps if his delivery could be better? I don't know, but I've seen absolutely no evidence of Jamon presenting himself as God's gift or better than anyone else. And if you've got any kind of evidence, then please educate me. I'm not saying that we should give the MJ Cast a free pass because of their amazing content, and I'm not saying I agree with everything that the individual members tweet. What I am saying is that they're entitled to their own opinions, and also please bear in mind that if they tweet something you have a problem with, this could be coming from a place of being relentlessly bullied. You've probably seen some of this ugliness directed at them, but you don't realise the extent of what they're dealing with, and it's to their absolute credit that none of this rubs off on the podcast. And during my discussion with Jamon, it's clear that he's now taken accountability for how he has dealt with this ugliness. And the block option on Twitter, it's just a powerful thing, and I'm guessing that this will be utilised a bit more than it has been. So what does the future bring for the MJ Cast? Well, with Elise on board, there's a lot more content to come. Q highlighted the actual importance of Elise and the fact that her involvement, her support, her friendship actually saved the MJ Cast. So a massive, massive thank you to Elise. Jamon's recent political tweet stirred up a bigger discussion about whether we should keep politics out of the community. But as Jamon says, was Michael silent? Did he only release safe songs and never comment on social issues? It's certainly going to be interesting seeing how the MJ Cast approach this divisive issue. Now, I want to see a future where the MJ Cast continue to expand their reach and to continue to collaborate with other content creators. The fact that they've collaborated for this video shows that they're not some exclusive card-carrying group that no one else can access. The team have a unique place in the fandom. They're building an archive and they have exclusive insider access. The quality of their content is something the MJ estate or Sony should either be doing themselves or getting behind, but sadly that's unlikely to happen. Now, I wouldn't want an MJ Cast who blindly agree with everything the estate is doing. As I said before, we need to be holding the estate responsible, and I'm glad that the MJ Cast do this. So before we go, the last questions I always ask is, what does Michael Jackson's legacy mean, and how do you honour this legacy? Well, Jamon replied and said, Michael's legacy is complicated. There's the fans' view and the general public's view. In Jamon's opinion, Michael was a selfless humanitarian and boundary-pushing innovator, and it's up to those of us who truly care about him to promote this historical truth. Elise says she puts equal weight on his art and his humanitarianism. I knew I was going to get that word wrong. And she honours this via her work with the MJ Cast and also by taking his life and his work seriously, and by approaching it from all sides and not putting Michael up on a pedestal, but trying to look at him as a human being who accomplished great things. Elise also says that the more we understand who Michael Jackson was, the more we can honour him. So I just want to say a big thank you to the MJ Cast for your input for this episode and for your combined continued dedication to the life and artistry of Michael Jackson. And also thank you so much for my viewers and listeners for sharing with us your opinions about the world's best Michael Jackson podcast.